There is a board on the west wall of the coaching shed at Cade Ridge, dark walnut gone almost black with age and gun oil, and on it are engraved the names of every Marine who ever cleaned the Century. It is a short list. In 31 years the course has been shot clean 19 times, and I had read those 19 names so often that I knew the grain of the wood around each one. I used to tell the young coaches that the board was the closest thing the Corps had to Scripture. I believed it. I believed a great many things that spring that I do not believe anymore, and most of them were about who is allowed to be great and who is not. My name is End Calloway. I was a gunnery sergeant then, senior range coach at the marksmanship school, and I had spent 19 years teaching men to shoot and 4 more teaching the men who taught them. I could look at a shooter through a spotting scope and tell you inside of 5 rounds whether he would ever be any good, and I was almost never wrong, and being almost never wrong is a poison that works slowly. It teaches you that your eye is the measure of the thing. It teaches you that talent has a shape you already know, a look, a way of settling behind a rifle, and that anyone who does not have that shape is wasting your time and theirs. I want to be honest about the man I was because otherwise none of the rest of it means anything. I was not cruel. I did not shove people or scream in their faces. My kind of contempt was quieter and worse. I simply decided quickly and permanently what a person was, and then I stopped looking. I had decided that marksmanship, real marksmanship, the kind that gets your name on that black board, was a thing that lived in a certain kind of man, and I could spot the kind on sight, and everyone else was a customer to be processed. That spring the school was having the worst week I could remember. We had a new evaluation cycle coming, a distinguished marksman certification that headquarters had tightened up, and the standard they'd fixed on was the Century. 100 targets, electronic pop-ups, mixed distances from 200 to 800 yards, timed exposures that shrank as you climbed, a switching crosswind that came off the ridge and could not be trusted from one string to the next. 100 targets, 100 rounds, no misses allowed to certify. Clean it or don't. My staff could not clean it. These were good shooters. Staff Sergeant Ruiz had won a divisional match 2 years running. Sergeant Book, his name was Bexcombe, but no one had called him anything but Book since Boot could hold a group at 600 that would make you weep. They were the best young rifle Marines I had, and I had trained them, and one after another that week they walked off the line at 96, 94, 91, faces gray, and they blamed the rifles. That was the part that curdled in me. They blamed the rifles. We were shooting a new issue variant that cycle, a rebarreled match gun with a different optic than the men were used to, and by Wednesday the shed had talked itself into a story. The gun was the problem. The gun couldn't hold. The optic drifted. It was a bad lot. Ruiz said it in front of me, straight-faced, that no one could clean the Century with that rifle, that the standard was broken, that headquarters had bought junk and was going to fail good Marines for it. I let them believe it. God help me, part of me half believed it too, because the alternative, that the standard was fine and my best men simply were not good enough, was a thing I did not want to look at square. A gatekeeper hates nothing so much as the discovery that his own people can't get through the gate. So the mood in the shed was foul and self-pitying, and the board on the west wall with its 19 names had started to feel less like scripture and more like a rebuke. And that is where we were on the Thursday morning when the evaluator arrived. She came in a plain government sedan, alone, and parked it crooked the way people do when they've driven a long way. I was on the observation deck with a coffee gone cold, and I watched her get out and stand a moment looking at the ridge line and the wind flags along the 800, and I did not think anything about her at all, which was itself the first mistake, because a shooter looks at wind flags the way a sailor looks at the sky, and she read the whole range in about 4 seconds before she ever moved toward the shed. She wore plain utilities, clean and worn soft, no name tape I could see from that distance, no rank that caught the light. Middle years, unremarkable build, brown hair going gray at the temples, cut short and practical. She carried a small case and a data book and nothing else, and she walked toward us without hurry, and by the time she reached the deck I had already filed her. Headquarters admin. Evaluator who checks boxes and reads scores. Somebody who would sit behind us with a clipboard and certify what the real shooters did. I had seen 100 of her. That was the thing. I was so sure I had seen 100 of her that I did not actually see her at all. "Morning," she said. "I'm looking for the senior coach." "You found him," I said. "Gunny Calloway." "Marsh." She put out a hand and I shook it, and I registered, the way you register something and then immediately overrule it, that her grip had the flat, dry calm of a person whose hands do exactly what she tells them and nothing else. "Headquarters sent me down for the certification cycle. I understand you're having some trouble with it." "Some," I said, and I heard the defensiveness in my own voice and disliked it. "New rifles this cycle. There's an issue with the lot. My people are shooting well and the equipment's letting them down. I've got a report going up about it." She looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable, not unkindly, just looking, the way you look at a target through glass before you commit to a call. "The equipment," she said. "The optic drifts," I said. "You'll see it in the scores. 94s, 96s from men who shoot clean on their own guns. That's not the shooters, that's the gear." She said, which was not agreement, and I bristled at the not agreement. And I decided in that moment that she was going to be one of those headquarters people who'd never held a rifle in anger and was here to lecture me about my own range. "Do you mind if I watch a string before we get into paperwork?" "Watch all you like," I said. "Book's up next. He's my best. If he can't clean it, nobody's cleaning it with these rifles, and that'll be right there in your data." I meant it as proof. I was handing her, I thought, the evidence for my own report. Watch my best man fall short, I thought, and you'll write it up the way I've written it up and this'll all go away. She found a spot at the back of the firing line out of the way, and she opened her little data book and uncapped a pen and she waited, and something in the way she waited should have warned me. There was no boredom in it. Most evaluators wait the way people wait for a bus. She waited the way a shooter waits for the flag to change, completely still, completely awake, every part of her already working. Book got on the line at 10. He was a picture of a rifleman. Book was long and unhurried, big soft hands that gentled a trigger like it was a living thing, a face that gave nothing away. I had built him. I had taken a 19-year-old who flinched at his own report, and I had spent 4 years making him into the shooter now settling into the prone on the 200-yard line. And watching him get down behind that rifle, I felt the old warm certainty that whatever else was wrong in the world, I at least knew what a shooter looked like, and it looked like that. "Century course," the tower called. 100 targets, escalating distance, exposures per the card. Misses are misses, shooter ready. "Ready," Book said. The first bank of targets came up at 200, big and generous, 10-second exposures, and Book put them down like a man closing drawers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, easy, clean. The count board ticked. 10 for 10. 20 for 20. He rolled through the 300 and the 400 without a stumble, and behind him I stood with my arms crossed and my chin up because this was mine. This competence was mine. I had made it. The trouble started at 600. The wind off the ridge had been quiet all morning, and now it woke up. I saw the flags on the 6 lift and swing, a fishtail, the worst kind, the kind that lies to you steady for 4 seconds and then gone and then back from a different quarter. Book felt it. I saw him feel it, saw the little hitch as he tried to time the lulls, and he was good enough to get most of them, but the century does not forgive most. Exposure 41, a 600-yard silhouette on a 4-second timer. Came up in a gust and Book sent his round into the wind's lie and the target stayed up. Miss. He got the next, and the one after, but something had cracked in him, the way it cracks in every shooter when the clean run dies. The tension of trying not to miss again is worse than the wind. He dropped another at 700, and at the 800 bank, small far targets swimming in the mirage 3-second exposures, he dropped 2 more. He came off the line at 95, and he lay there a moment with his forehead against the back of his hand, and then he got up and safed the rifle and walked back with his jaw set, and he did not look at me, and he said to the shed at large, not to me, "That gun won't hold past 6. I'm telling you, it's the gun." And the shed murmured its agreement because they needed it to be the gun, and I needed it to be the gun, and the only person in that shed who said nothing at all was the plain woman at the back with the data book, who had written something small and precise and then capped her pen. "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute?" She said it quietly into the sour silence after Book's walk-off, and for a second nobody understood that she had spoken. She'd stood up from her spot at the back and taken a step toward the line, and she was looking at Book's rifle where he'd laid it on the bench, the rifle he'd just cursed, and she said it again, a little louder, to Book directly. "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute? I'd like to check something." There was a beat of pure silence, and then Ruiz laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh exactly. That was almost worse. It was the laugh you give a child who has asked to drive the car, indulgent, delighted, certain. And once Ruiz laughed, the rest of them let go too, the whole shed easing into it, the tension of the bad morning finding somewhere to go, and here was somewhere. The headquarters lady in her soft utilities asking to borrow a rifle to check something. "Ma'am," Ruiz said, grinning, "that's a real rifle. That's not a—" He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The something he didn't say hung in the air, and the men laughed harder at the shape of it. "I know what it is," she said, mild, not rising to it. "That's why I'd like to borrow it." I should have stopped it there. I was the senior man. But I confessed to you plainly that I did not want to stop it, because her asking to shoot offended the thing in me that guarded the black board, offended it the way a stranger touching a rifle you've cleaned 1,000 times offends you. She had no business on my line. She had the wrong shape. She had come here to certify what real shooters did, and now she wanted to play at it. And some ugly small part of me wanted her to try, wanted her to get down behind that gun and spray the 200 and get up red-faced so that everyone would know their places again. So instead of stopping it, I said in a voice pitched for the shed, "Give the evaluator a rifle. She wants to check something." And that got the biggest laugh of all, because now it was sanctioned. Now the gunny had made it a joke officially. And Ruiz picked up a rifle from the ready rack, not Book's, a spare. And he picked it the way you pick the worst one. I saw him do it. He grabbed the loner that had a reputation for a heavy trigger and a scope nobody trusted. And he carried it over and set it down in front of her with a little flourish, a little bow almost. "There you go, ma'am, careful, it kicks." And the shed howled. She looked at the rifle he'd given her. Then she looked at Ruiz once without heat, the way you look at a wind flag to see which way it's lying. And she said, "This one's fine." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because it is the hinge of the whole thing, and I have thought about it every day since. I felt superior. I stood in my shed in front of my board with my arms crossed, and I watched an unremarkable woman pick up the rifle my sergeant had handed her as an insult. And I felt the clean, warm certainty of a man who knows exactly how the next 10 minutes are going to go. I had her filed. I had the whole thing filed. I had never in my life been so completely wrong about anything, and I was about to find out, one target at a time, exactly how wrong a certain man can be. She didn't get down. That was the first thing that reached me through the noise of my own certainty. Book had gone prone in the classic slow ceremony, the whole settling ritual I'd taught him. She didn't. She stood at the bench and worked the rifle's action twice, slow, feeling the cycle, feeling where the trigger broke. She wasn't testing whether the rifle was good. I realized later. She was learning it, mapping it, taking its measure the way you take the measure of a borrowed tool before you trusted your name to it. She thumbed the elevation and windage turrets through their travel and back, reading the clicks by feel, not looking at the numbers. And she settled the scope's parallax with a small motion of her cheek against the stock and left it. "Ma'am, you'll want to get down for the," Book started, helpful now, the anger gone out of him, replaced by an awkward decency. "I'll shoot it standing to start," she said. "Warm the wind up. Shoot it standing. At 200 offhand on a timer." The shed went quiet in a new way, a way I didn't like, because it is one thing to laugh at someone for being out of their depth and another to watch them wade in like the water is theirs. "Tower," she said, "when you're ready, run the card straight through, don't slow it for me." There was a pause up in the tower, then the speaker crackled. "Century course, 100 targets, stand by." The first silhouette came up at 200. She was already on it. There was no search, no settle, none of the long ceremony. The rifle came up and stopped, and the shot broke. All of it one motion, and the target went down, and I heard the count board tick, and I had time to think lucky before the second target came up and went down in the same beat, and the third, and the fourth. She had a cadence. That was the thing that started to work on me before anything else. Before the score even mattered, she had a rhythm, an even unhurried tempo. Target up, rifle up, break down, and again, every shot spaced the same as the last. A tick-tick-tick as regular as a clock, no hurry and no hesitation. The same interval whether the target was easy or the timer was tight. Book shot in bursts and pauses, fast when he was sure and slow when he doubted. She didn't doubt. Every shot came at the same moment in its own small measure of time, and the effect of it, standing there watching, was hypnotic and a little frightening, like watching a machine that has decided to be patient. 10 for 10 offhand at 200. She lowered the rifle and rolled her shoulders once and got down into the prone for the 300 bank, and she got down wrong. That's what I thought, wrong, too fast. None of the fussing. She was just suddenly behind the rifle and part of the ground, and the 11th target came up and went down, and the 12th, and the cadence never changed. I uncrossed my arms. I didn't decide to. I just noticed at some point that they were uncrossed, that I had leaned forward, that I was no longer a man watching a joke play out but a coach watching something on my line that I could not account for. Because here is what a senior coach knows in his hands after 23 years. He knows what luck looks like, and he knows what skill looks like, and they do not look alike. Luck is jagged. Luck hits and misses and hits, and the shooter's body tells you every time whether he expected it. Skill is smooth, and the body is quiet, and the shooter is not surprised by his own hits because he knew where the round was going before he sent it. She was not surprised by anything. That was what raised the hair on my arms somewhere around the 20th target. She wasn't hopping. She was collecting. Every target that came up was already hers before she fired. The shot was just the paperwork. 20 for 20. She reached up between targets and put a single click of windage on. I saw her do it. One click. Left. Reading a flag on the 3 that I hadn't even registered had moved. And the 21st came up and went down dead center, and I turned my head very slowly and looked at Ruiz. Ruiz wasn't grinning anymore. By 30, the shed had gone silent. Not the sour silence of the morning. A different silence, the kind that comes into a room when the thing happening in it has become larger than the people watching, and everyone senses at the same moment that they should stop making noise. The men who had laughed were standing very still along the back of the firing line, and one by one they drifted forward, drawn in, until there was a loose half-circle of Marines behind the plain woman on the bench, watching a spare loaner rifle, the bad trigger loaner. The one Ruiz had handed her as an insult, put target after target into the dirt without a single miss. I found that I was counting out loud, not loud, under my breath, 30, 31, 32. Book had come up beside me at some point and he was counting too, the two of us muttering the numbers like men saying a rosary, and neither of us looked at the other because to look would have been to admit what was in both our faces. She worked the 400 bank in the mirage that was starting to build off the warming ground, and I watched her read it, watched her cheek shift a half-inch on the stock to catch the target through the shimmer at a clearer moment, watched her wait a fraction, not a hesitation but a choice, letting a boil of mirage pass before she broke the shot so the target sat where it truly was, and not where the heat had smeared it. That is a thing I teach in the advanced course over 3 days, and most men never get it in their bones. She had it so deep in her bones she didn't know she was doing it. 35, 40, the cadence never broke. Tick, tick, tick. Gunny, Book said, very low, not taking his eyes off her. Who is she? Headquarters, I said, and the word came out of me hollow because I no longer believed it meant what I'd meant by it an hour ago. Headquarters, an evaluator, a box checker. I had built a whole small kingdom of certainty on those words, and it was coming down one target at a time, and I could feel the wind of it. That's not the gun's problem, Book said, is it? He didn't say it like a question. He said it like a man confessing. Because Book had stood on that same line an hour before, and cursed that same class of rifle, and blamed the steel for what the wind had done to him. And now, he was watching a woman he'd never met pick up the worst rifle in the rack, and do the impossible thing with it, calmly. And every excuse he and I and all of us had built that week was dying in front of him. And to his everlasting credit, Book was the first of us to let it die. No, I said, my mouth was dry. It was never the gun. 48, 49, 50. Halfway and not a single target still standing behind her, and the count board glowing its clean, unbroken figure, and the plain woman on the bench breathing slow and even, her cadence a metronome, ticking us all toward something none of us had a name for yet. And that was when the old man came in. I heard the shed door, and I heard boots stop, and I turned and saw Master Gunnery Sergeant Wickham standing just inside the door with his cover in his hand. Wickham was retired in place, near enough, a legend from before my time, a man who had coached the rifle team back when the black board had 14 names on it instead of 19, and who came down to the school now and again to sit in the sun and tell the young shooters they were doing it wrong. He'd come in on the noise of the silence, I think, the way an old fire horse comes awake at a bell, and he stood in the doorway, and he did not look at the count board, and he did not look at me. He looked at her hands. He looked at her cadence. He listened to the spacing of the shots, the even unhurried tick of it, and I watched the blood go out of Master Gunnery Sergeant Wickham's face, watched 30 years fall off him, watched him become a young man looking at a ghost. And he said one word, very quietly, in the silence of my shed. He said a name. Marsh, Wickham said. Just that at first. The name I'd been given at the deck an hour ago and filed away as nothing, Marsh, headquarters, an evaluator, except Wickham didn't say it the way you say a stranger's name. He said it the way you say the name of a thing you'd half convinced yourself you'd made up, a thing from the best years of your life that the young men had stopped believing in. Master Guns, I said. He didn't answer me. He crossed the shed slow, past the half-circle of my staff, and he stopped a respectful distance behind the bench, and he stood there with his cover crushed in both hands like a nervous recruit, and he watched her take the 51st target at 400 and the 52nd, and only then into the quiet between two shots, without turning her head, she said, "Hello, Ray." "You're still doing it," Wickham said, and his voice cracked on it. "The count, you're still counting the same." "Never found a reason to stop," she said, and took the 53rd. The wind came off the ridge again then, the same fishtailing devil that had broken Book at 600, and the far banks were coming. The 6, the 7, the 8, the small deep targets on the shrinking timers where every man on my staff had died that week. The flags lifted and swung and lied, and I watched the plain woman named Marsh do the thing that I will carry with me until I die. She didn't fight the wind. Book had fought it, muscled it, tried to time it and beat it, and it had beaten him. She listened to it. Between the 55th and 56th targets she lay still for a moment longer than her cadence. One held breath, and I understood she was letting the wind finish telling her something, reading the flags and the mirage and the grass on the berm all at once, building the whole living, moving picture of the air between her and 800 yards of ground. And only when she had it did she come back to her rhythm, and the 56th went down. And the wind that had killed my best man did not touch her round. 600, Book breathed. She's on the 6. She put a correction on the turret. I saw it. a click and a half of wind held into the ridge, and the 57th silhouette came up in a gust, and she waited half a heartbeat for the gust's own rhythm, for the lull she'd already predicted, and broke the shot into the lull, and the target went down, and she was already back to center, already waiting on the next tick, tick, the metronome running clean through the exact stretch of range that had humiliated every Marine in the building. 60, 65. The wind switched full around, came from behind the right shoulder now, a reversal that should have cost her 3 targets while she figured it out, and she read the switch off a single flag on the 7 before the round that would have shown her the error, adjusted for a wind that hadn't yet proven itself, and put the 68th target down dead center on faith and skill and 20 years of listening to moving air. She'd corrected for the switch a full target before it would have bitten her. I have never seen anything like it. I have coached at the highest levels of this, and I had never seen anyone read a reversal before it cost them a round, and I heard myself make a small sound, and beside me Book had stopped breathing entirely. 70, 75. The 800 bank now, the small far targets swimming in the full heat of the risen day, 3-second timers, the killing ground, and the cadence never changed. Tick, tick, tick. She was not faster on the easy ones or slower on the hard ones. Every target on that course, from the generous 200 to the swimming 8, got exactly the same measured beat of her attention, the same even interval, as though difficulty were a thing that happened to other shooters and simply did not apply to her. 76, 77. And the shed, my sour disbelieving kingdom had gone past silence into something like reverence. The men were not slouching anymore. Somewhere in the last 30 targets they had come, without a word from anyone, to something close to attention, standing straight in a loose rank behind her, and Ruiz, who had handed her the bad rifle with a bow, Ruiz had tears standing in his eyes and was not ashamed of them. Because we all understood by then what we were watching. Not a good score, not even a great one. We were watching mastery, the real thing, the thing the black board was supposed to be about, and we were watching it come out of a body none of us had thought to look at twice, and every man in that shed was doing the same terrible arithmetic I was doing. She picked up the worst rifle in the rack, cold, no zero of her own, no warm-up, and she is about to clean the course that broke all of us, and we laughed at her. 80, 85, 90. 90 targets, 90 rounds, 90 silhouettes down in the dirt, and not one still standing on that whole range, and the count board glowing its impossible unbroken number, and the plain woman on the bench breathing slow, her cheek welded to a stranger's rifle, running out the last of the course on a cadence as steady as a clock in an empty room. 91, I whispered. I couldn't stop. 92. The last bank came up at 800, the smallest targets, the tightest timers, the mirage at its worst, and if there was ever a place for the run to die it was there in those last 10, where the pressure of an unbroken 90-round string would have shaken the hand of any shooter alive. I have seen men clean 99 and throw the 100th into the berm, because the weight of the clean run finally reached their trigger finger. The last 10 of a clean century are the loneliest place in our whole world. She shot them like the first 10. That is the thing I need you to understand. There was no change, no gather, no bracing, no visible summoning of will. 93, 94, the same beat. 95, 96, 97, the metronome ticking, the far small targets falling one after another in the heat shimmer. 98, 99. The 100th target came up at 800 yards in a boil of mirage with the ridge wind fishtailing across it, the exact 100th target, and the whole shed stopped breathing as one man. And she waited, one beat, her beat, the same beat she'd given all 99 before it, no more and no less, letting the mirage roll past and the wind speak its last word, and the rifle broke, and 800 yards away the last silhouette went down into the dirt and stayed there. 100 targets, 100 rounds, 100 hits, the century clean, cold on a borrowed loaner rifle we'd all agreed was junk, by a woman we'd handed it to as a joke. Nobody cheered, it was past cheering. The count board glowed its clean round 100, and the shed was so silent I could hear the wind flags ticking on their poles out on the 600, and Marsh lay still behind the rifle for a moment longer, finishing whatever a shooter like her finishes after the last round, and then she safed the weapon, cleared it, laid it down gently on the bench. Gently, that bad trigger loner, like it had done her a kindness, and she got up off the bench and rolled her shoulders once and picked up her data book. And Master Gunnery Sergeant Wickham, the legend, the old man who'd coached the team back when the board had 14 names, came to attention behind her and rendered her a slow salute, and his hand was shaking. "You want to tell them, Ray," she said quietly, "or should I?" Wickham held the salute another second, then brought it down, and he turned to the shed, to me mostly, to me and my staff and my board, and he said in the wrecked voice of a proud old man, "This is Dana Marsh." He said it like it should mean something, and I saw on the faces of my young Marines that it didn't, not yet, and I watched that land on Wickham as a small grief, that the name had gone out of the shed's memory in the years since, and he squared himself to fix it. "Distinguished marksman," he said. "First woman to earn the badge in this school's history earned it on this range on that line 22 years ago offhand in worse wind than this. Service record holder 600 and 800 both still standing. Coached the rifle team to 4 national titles after I couldn't shoot anymore. They called her," and his voice went and he had to stop and start again. "The shooters of my day called her the metronome. Because of the count. Because she never changed the beat, not for anything." And then he said the thing that took the floor out from under me. "Gunny Calloway," Wickham said, turning to me. "That board on your wall, the record you've been quoting to these boys for years. 600 cleaned in the switching wind, 31 years standing. The name on it." I knew the name. Of course I knew the name. I had read it 10,000 times. I had run my thumb over the engraving of it. It was the oldest and proudest name on the black board, the one I told the young coaches was the high-water mark of the whole school, the shot none of them would ever beat. "D. Marsh," I said. My voice did not sound like mine. "D. Marsh," Wickham said. "Dana Marsh. She's been the record on your wall for 31 years, son. You've been guarding her name from the people who might come along and be as good as her. And you looked at her walk into your shed this morning, and you handed her a loner rifle to be funny." I have tried many times since to describe what happened inside me in that moment, and the best I can do is this. A man who has built his whole sense of himself on being able to see discovers all at once that he has been blind in exactly the place he was proudest of his sight. Everything I believed about who greatness lived in, the shape of it, the look of it, the bloodline of it, every certainty I'd stood on for 23 years, had just picked up the worst rifle in my rack and cleaned the course that broke my best men, and the record I'd been guarding on my sacred wall was hers, had always been hers. And I had walked past her name every day of my career without once imagining that it belonged to a person who might one day stand plain and unremarkable in my doorway and ask, mildly, to borrow a rifle. I crossed the shed. I don't remember deciding to. The men parted from me and I walked to the west wall and I took the record book down off its hook beside the board, the master log, the leather one, the one no coach but me had touched in years, the one I'd guarded like it was the honor of the Corps itself. And I carried it back across the silent shed and I held it out to her. "Ma'am," I said, "this is yours, it always was. I've been keeping it for you and I didn't know it." She looked at the book in my hands. She didn't take it right away. She looked at me instead, that same long look she'd given me at the deck, the wind flag look, reading which way I was lying. Except I wasn't lying anymore. I was as honest in that moment as I have ever been in my life, standing in front of a woman I'd dismissed and holding out the record of her own greatness, and asking her to forgive me for guarding it against her. "Keep it," she said. "That's your job, you keep the board." I laughed, I said. It came out of me before I could stop it. "When you asked for the rifle, I let them laugh. I picked." I stopped. "I'm the one who made it a joke, ma'am. The gunny sanctioned it, that's on me." She was quiet a moment. Then she did something I did not expect. She reached out and she put her flat, dry, calm hand on the record book on top of my hands, and she pushed it gently back toward my chest. "Sit down a second, Gunny," she said. "All of you, sit down. I want to tell you why I came." We sat. 23-year gunnery sergeants and divisional champions and a legend of the old team. We sat down on the benches of the coaching shed like recruits, and Dana Marsh stood in front of us with the loner rifle on the bench beside her, and she told us why she'd come. "I didn't come to certify anybody," she said. "I came because the scores you were sending up said the standard was broken. 94s and 96s from good shooters, week after week, and a report climbing the chain that said the new rifles couldn't hold and the century was unfair and Marines were going to fail through no fault of their own." She looked at me, not unkindly. "I've read a lot of those reports over the years. They almost always say the same thing. It's the gun. It's the wind. It's the lot. It's the standard. It's anything at all except the one thing nobody wants to write down." "Which is," Book said from the bench beside me. He said it quietly. He already knew. He'd known since Target 30. "Which is that the standard's fine and you're not there yet," Marsh said. "That's not an insult, son. I wasn't there yet once either. Nobody's born on the far side of the century. The reason I picked up that rifle," she nodded at the loner, "the worst one in your rack, cold, is that I needed you to see it wasn't the rifle. Because as long as you believe it's the rifle, you stop working. The excuse is the enemy. The excuse is the only thing between your best shooter and that 100th target, not the wind. Not the gun. The story you tell yourself about the wind and the gun." She picked the loner up off the bench and held it a moment, turned it in her hands, and set it down again. "There's nothing wrong with this rifle," she said. "There's nothing wrong with your shooters. Book," she found him on the bench, "you dropped 4 today, all of them past 600, all of them in the switch. You're fighting the wind instead of listening to it. You're timing the lulls, which means you're always a half-second behind the air. Stop timing it. Start reading it. You'll clean this course inside a month and you won't need a new rifle to do it." She looked around at the rest of them. "Every one of you was within 4 points of it. That's not a broken standard. That's 4 points of excuse. I came down here to take the excuse away. That's the whole reason I borrowed the rifle." She had cleaned the century cold, on a joke of a rifle, to prove to a room full of men who'd laughed at her that their failure was in their hands and not their gear, and she'd done it without once raising her voice, without a word of triumph, without so much as looking at the count board when the 100th fell. She'd done it the way she'd shot it, on the beat. No flourish. Just the truth, delivered at the same even interval as everything else about her. "You could have just told us," Ruiz said. His voice was thick. "You could have walked in and told us it was on us." "Would you have believed me?" Marsh said. Ruiz looked at the floor. Then, honest man that he turned out to be under the swagger, he shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "I'd have thought you were headquarters." "So I borrowed a rifle instead," she said, and there was for the first time the very faintest warmth at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile of triumph. A teacher's smile. The oldest one there is. She stayed 3 more days. She didn't have to. Her report could have been written in an hour. The standard is sound. The equipment is sound. Recommend additional coaching in reading switching wind at extended ranges. And she could have driven off in her crooked parked sedan and left us to it. But she stayed, and she coached, and I watched the woman I dismissed as a box checker take my best shooters out to the 600 line one at a time and teach them to listen to the air. She taught Book to stop timing the lulls. She lay down beside him in the dirt in her soft utilities, and she talked him through a full string in a fishtail wind, low and steady. Don't chase it. Let it come to you. The wind has a rhythm too. Find its beat and put your beat inside it. And on the 3rd day, Book cleaned the 600 bank in a switch that would have cost him 3 rounds on Monday. And he got up out of the prone and he looked at her the way I imagine I'd once looked at Wickham, and she just nodded and said, "There it is. That was always in there. You just had a story in the way." She taught Ruiz that the loner he'd handed her as an insult had a perfectly good trigger once you stopped flinching from it, and she made him shoot it only it for 2 days, until he stopped blaming the steel for his own anticipation. She never once mentioned the bow he'd given her, the little flourish, the careful, "it kicks." She let him keep his dignity while she took his excuse. That is a kind of mercy I did not have the wisdom to understand until much later. And me, she coached me too, though I was long past my own shooting days. On the last evening she found me at the blackboard, standing where I always stood, and she looked at the 19 names a while with me. "You quote my 600 record to the young ones," she said. "Ray told me." "Every cycle," I said. "It's the high mark. I tell them nobody'll ever beat it." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Don't tell them that." I looked at her. "Tell them somebody will," she said. "Tell them you hope it's them. A record you guard so nobody can touch it isn't an honor, Gunny. It's a headstone. The whole point of the board is that the names are supposed to keep coming." She reached up and touched the wood beside her own engraved name, D. Marsh, 600, cleaned in switch, and she said, "I didn't shoot that to keep anybody off the wall. I shot it so the ones coming up would know it could be done. That's the only reason to be first at anything. So the ones behind you know the door opens." I made gunnery sergeant into master sergeant 2 years after that, and I run the whole marksmanship school now, and there is a great deal I do differently. But the thing I changed first, the very next morning after she drove off in her crooked sedan, was the way I stand behind a new shooter on the line. I don't file them anymore. I gave that up. I gave up the whole poisoned gift of the quick certain eye that told me who had the shape of it and who was wasting my time, because I stood in my own shed and watched that eye be as wrong as an eye can be, watched it look straight at Dana Marsh and see admin, see a box checker, see anything at all except the best rifle shot ever to come through those doors. Now when a plain, unremarkable recruit gets down behind a rifle for the first time and looks like nothing, looks like no one, I make myself remember the sound of that metronome. Tick, tick, tick. The most dangerous thing I ever heard, coming out of the last person in the room I'd have bet on. The excuse is the enemy. She said that standing on my line, and I have made it the first thing every coach at my school learns. It's not the gun. It's not the wind. It's not the lot or the standard or the light. It's the story you tell yourself instead of doing the work, and my whole career I've been telling myself the biggest story of all, that I already knew who was allowed to be great, that greatness had a bloodline and a look and I could read it on sight. She took that excuse away from me the same way she took Ruiz's. She didn't argue with me. She just picked up the worst rifle in my rack cold and cleaned the course that broke my best men, on the beat, without a word, and let the truth of it do what arguing never could. There is a name on the black board on the west wall of my shed, the oldest and the proudest, 33 years standing now, that I used to guard against the future. D. Marsh. I don't guard it anymore. I point to it. I tell every class that comes through that a woman set that mark cold and offhand in a wind that would scare them, that she walked back into this shed years later looking like nobody at all and cleaned 100 straight on a loaner we'd handed her as a joke, and that not one of us, not the champions, not the legend, not the gunny who guarded her own name without knowing it, not one of us saw her coming. And then I tell them the last thing she told me, before she got in her sedan and drove off the way she'd come, plain and unhurried, and taking the measure of the wind flags one more time on her way out. I tell them, somebody's going to beat that record someday. I hope it's you. And when you get down behind that rifle for the first time and you feel like nobody, remember that the best shot who ever stood on this line looked exactly like nobody too, right up until the first target fell and stayed down, and the beat began.